The air inside Block C of Ashfield State Penitentiary was stale, a mixture of sweat, metal, and something harder to name, the quiet scent of resignation. John Merrick sat alone in cell 42, hands folded neatly on his lap, eyes fixed on the narrow window above his cot. The light filtering through it was not sunlight but the pale glare of a halogen lamp from the prison yard. He had 29 days left to live. John wasn't the sort of man who complained. In fact, the guards often noted how unervingly calm he was, as if the weight of a death sentence had already been accepted and archived. At 68, he moved slowly, spoke rarely, and kept his memories tighter than his fists. The only time his voice had risen, even slightly, was the day he was told that his last appeal had been denied. Now all that remained was the formal ritual, the last meal, the last words, and the last request. It was the last request that stirred something in him. Daniel Reyes, 35, new to Ashfield Penitentiary and not yet hardened by the system, was assigned to Merrick's case. He stood outside the cell that morning with a clipboard in one hand and uncertainty in the other. He'd heard about Merrick, the old man of Ashfield, convicted of murdering 3 young men during a violent night in a condemned neighborhood on the east side of town. All evidence pointed to him. A confession. Blood on his clothes. Witnesses who disappeared. Case closed. But there was something odd about the man. He didn't look like someone who had killed out of rage. He looked like someone who had once lost everything and had been waiting quietly ever since. "You asked to file your last request," Daniel said, his voice even but respectful. "I need to record it." John didn't look up right away. He blinked, slowly, as if returning from a distant place. "I want to see my dog," he said finally. Daniel raised his eyebrows. He double-checked the form. "I'm sorry, your dog." "Her name is Luna," John said. "Black Lab. She was taken after the arrest. I don't know where. Maybe a shelter. Maybe dead. But if she's alive, I'd like to see her. Just once." It wasn't the request Daniel had expected. "No priest, no letter to a loved one, no steak dîner." "Sir," Daniel said cautiously, "I don't think we can. Animals aren't permitted in the death row wing. And there's no record of a dog being impounded after your arrest." "I can check, but—"
"Please," John interrupted.
"I raised her from a pup. She was all I had left after my wife passed. She was with me that night."
"She saw what he saw."
"She knows." Daniel paused.
"She knows what?"
But John only closed his eyes. "Just find her, son. Please." That please caught Daniel off guard.
There was no desperation in it, only acquiescence.
Something about it stayed with him the entire day. That night, Daniel sat in the dim glow of his kitchen with the file open on his kitchen table. The case against John Merrick was airtight, or at least, that's what the report claimed. The bodies of 3 young men were found behind an abandoned grocery store in Ashfield's Old District. All 3 had multiple stab wounds, and Merrick had been found just blocks away, his clothes stained with blood. The motive?
Vague. The evidence?
Circumstantial.
The confession?
Dubious at best. The only thing mentioned briefly, in the initial police report, was that a large black dog had been barking loudly in the alley that night, drawing the attention of a neighbor. That neighbor was never interviewed again. Her statement was omitted from the trial.
A black dog. Luna?
The more Daniel read, the more a knot tightened in his stomach. The next morning, he made a few calls to local shelters. Most had nothing on file. But one, a small rescue center on the outskirts of Ashfield, called back. "We did intake a female black lab about 5 years ago," the woman on the phone said. "She had no microchip, but was wearing a blue collar with the name Luna on the tag.
Shy.
Quiet. We called her that ever since. Still here, actually. No one ever adopted her." Daniel drove out that same afternoon. The rescue center was quiet, clean, and worn at the edges. The woman led him to the kennel in the back. There she was, a black Labrador, gray now at the muzzle, lying curled in the corner. When she saw Daniel, she didn't react, not immediately. But when he said the name John, she lifted her head. At the second mention, Merrick, she stood up. "She never barks," the woman said. "Hardly eats, either.
Like she's waiting for someone."
Daniel crouched near the kennel. Luna sniffed the air, slowly approached, then gently nudged his hand with her nose. He felt the chill then, the kind that didn't come from the cold, but from something deeper.
Instinct.
Recognition. He made the arrangements that evening. Back at the prison, Warden Holloway was skeptical. A dog?
On desro?
Reyes, what do you think this is, a movie? I'm not asking for an overnight visit, Daniel said. Just an hour. Supervised.
Outside, in the visitation yard.
No press.
No ceremony. The man's going to die.
What harm could it do?
After a long pause, Holloway exhaled. You get 1 hour.
And this is your responsibility. 2 days later, John Merrick stepped into the yard for the first time in years. He looked thinner than his age, bones pressing through the orange jumpsuit, but his eyes were alive with something Daniel hadn't seen before, anticipation. When Luna was brought in on a leash, she stopped 10 feet away, stiff and still. John knelt slowly, ignoring the ache in his knees. Luna, he whispered. She moved. In an instant, she ran toward him, pressing herself into his chest, tail thrashing, nose buried against his shirt. John wrapped his arms around her, his whole body shaking. She remembers, he murmured.
Daniel watched in silence.
It wasn't just the reunion of a man and his dog. It was the breaking of something that had been held too long. He realized then, Luna didn't just remember John. She remembered the night. The fear. The smell.
The truth.
And maybe, just maybe, she could help tell it. Daniel Reyes hadn't slept well in days. He kept replaying the scene in the yard, Luna breaking into a sprint the moment she heard John Merrick's voice, the way she pressed herself against him, trembling not from fear but recognition. That wasn't a coincidence. That was memory.
Muscle deep, sans wound, instinctive memory.
Most dogs forget after years of absence. But Luna hadn't. The next morning, Daniel stood outside the kennel at the Ashfield Animal Rescue Center, watching Luna pace slowly inside her enclosure. He had gotten permission to keep her under protective care while further legal steps were reviewed. Officially, she was temporary evidence. Unofficially, she was now central to something far more complicated than anyone had anticipated. She doesn't act like the other dogs, said Maria, the shelter manager. It's like she's tracking something.
All the time.
We tried letting her off leash in the yard yesterday, and she just started circling one corner of the fence again and again. Like she was looking for a way out. Which corner? Daniel asked. Maria pointed to a spot on the far edge of the lot, just before the line of trees began. That night, Daniel pulled out the original police report again. The alley where the bodies were found was in Ashfield's Old Quarter, an area known for boarded-up buildings and narrow service roads. The report said nothing about a dog. Nothing about the corner Luna had paced. But buried in the witness list was the name of someone Daniel hadn't noticed before.
Hélène Maurice, 72, neighbor, initial witness.
Reported loud barking and yelling around 11 p.m. Claimed to have seen a large dog in the alley. Statement marked as non-credible due to dementia diagnosis.
Non crédible.
Daniel picked up the phone. Elaine still lived in the same house, a rundown 2-story clapboard just 3 blocks from where the murders had happened. She opened the door with a suspicious look but let Daniel in when he mentioned the case. I told them what I saw, she said, lowering herself into a creaky armchair.
3 men dragging something behind the building. Heard growling.
Then yelling.
A dog ran out. Black, like a shadow.
Barking like it was warning someone. She paused. I never said the man with the dog was the killer. He was yelling too. Not at the boys, at the dog. Trying to stop it.
Daniel leaned forward.
You're saying John Merrick didn't attack them? He tried to hold the dog back. Elaine nodded.
That is what he saw.
I wasn't asleep, young man. I was reading by the window. The police just didn't want it messy. Later that evening, Daniel returned to the prison and requested a second meeting with John. It wasn't protocol, but Warden Holloway had started giving him more leeway, perhaps curious, or perhaps simply tired of resisting. In the visitation room, John sat with both hands on the table, palms down. He looked exhausted but calm. You saw her, John said. Did she remember? She remembered, Daniel replied. And so did someone else. John raised an eyebrow.
Hélène Maurice. She saw everything.
She says you weren't attacking anyone.
You were holding Luna back.
John didn't speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was low. I was walking Luna that night. Late, like I always did. That alley's not far from where I lived.
Heard something, scuffling, shooting.
Luna darted off. I ran after her. He paused. They were beating someone. 3 of them. Young guys. I yelled. Luna barked and lunged. One of them pulled a knife. When I got there, the man on the ground was already dying. And then they came at me. One of them tried to push me against the wall. There was a struggle. I don't remember how, but blood ended up on me. Luna chased them off. I didn't chase them. I didn't stab anyone. Then why did you confess? John looked at Daniel, eyes heavy. I didn't confess. Not at first. They kept me in a holding cell for 36 hours. No lawyer. No food for the first day. They told me Luna was dead. They said they'd bury her in a landfill. I signed whatever they gave me. Daniel felt something hot rise in his throat. He believed him. That night, back in his apartment, Daniel couldn't sit still. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Luna pacing the yard, John's haunted expression, Elaine's shaking voice. He opened his laptop and began drafting a report.
Internal Memorandum, Request for indépendre review.
Subject, People vs. John Merrick, 2015. Submitted by Officer Daniel Reyes, ID 74593. In the report, he included Elaine's statement, John's testimony, and a request for DNA reanalysis of the crime scene samples using newer techniques. He didn't expect it to go far, but he needed it in writing. Paper was harder to bury than people. 3 days later, the report was returned to him, unopened. A note was attached.
Case closed. Chain of evidence compromised.
No further action to be taken. That night, his tires were slashed in the prison parking lot. 2 days later, Luna's kennel was broken into. They found the lock tampered with, the enclosure door wide open. But Luna was still inside, curled up in the corner, unharmed. Someone had tried to take her. She hadn't let them. Daniel installed a camera the next day. It was war now.
And the dog remembered everything.
The night after the break-in at the kennel, Daniel Reyes didn't go home. He stayed in the back room of the Ashfield Animal Rescue Center, curled up in a sleeping bag next to Luna's enclosure, one hand resting just over the metal bars. Luna slept lightly, her ears twitching at every distant sound. Daniel couldn't blame her. He was listening too. Someone had tried to silence a dog. That wasn't normal. That was desperation. By morning, Daniel was more convinced than ever. The truth wasn't just inconvenient to someone. It was dangerous. He decided to start where most cases go cold, the evidence locker. With the help of a quiet friend in forensics, Officer Leah Mercer, Daniel gained after-hours access to the crime scene archive stored in a basement below the county's old courthouse. Dusty shelves, faded boxes, and cracked labels greeted him like a forgotten cemetery of justice. After a short search, they found the box, case #TX, AF0815-397, Merrick, John. Inside, photographs. Scene reports. One bloodied shirt, sealed in plastic. And the medical examiner's report. Daniel skimmed until he found it. Victim number 2, male, 19. Multiple puncture wounds. One deep gash on left forearm, described as serrated. He paused. Serrated? He flipped to the pathology photo and held it under the desk lamp. There it was, a wound with irregular edges, slightly curved.
Not straight like a blade.
Not clean like a surgical incision. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through photos he'd taken of Luna's teeth during a recent checkup. He found a close-up of her upper jaw. Then he held the phone up to the pathology photo. The curve matched. The width. The depth. Even the spacing. Leah, he whispered, do you still have access to 3D modeling? She nodded slowly. I want you to do something crazy, Daniel said. Recreate that wound.
Digitally.
Then compare it to Luna's bite. She stared at him.
Are you serious? Dead serious.
By the next evening, Leah had results. She pulled up 2 3D renderings on her screen, the wound from victim number 2, and a digital reconstruction of Luna's jaw based on the dental records Daniel had supplied. The overlay was nearly perfect. The wound's not from a knife, she said. It's a canine bite. And it wasn't just incidental. It was defensive. The angle suggests the dog bit the attacker mid-motion. Daniel felt his hands tremble. So Luna bit one of them while they were stabbing someone? Most likely. Then why did the me say it was a serrated blade? Leah looked at him. Because that's what they were told to write. The next step was clear. Daniel contacted Rebecca Kim. They met in a quiet diner outside Ashfield, the kind with peeling vinyl seats and a waitress who knew when not to ask questions. Rebecca listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes in her battered notebook. I've heard rumors about Ashfield PD before, she said. Especially during the Cole Darnell era. Evidence disappearing. Witnesses recanted under pressure. But this. She tapped her pen. You're saying a dog remembered the truth, and now someone wants that dog gone. She's the only living witness, Daniel said. And she's not easy to intimidate.
Rebecca leaned forward.
You still have the pathology report? He slid it across the table. She scanned it, then pulled out a file of her own. This is Marcus Vega, she said. He was a known associate of the 3 victims, small-time dealer, enforcer for the cartel's Ashfield branch. He vanished 2 days after the murders. Word on the street was he got paid to keep his mouth shut. Daniel narrowed his eyes. You think he saw something? I think he was there.
Daniel leaned back in the booth.
It was all coming together. 3 men connected to a violent organization, one of them getting bitten by a dog during an altercation, and the only man arrested being the guy walking his pet through the wrong alley at the wrong time. Can you find Vega? He asked. Rebecca smiled faintly. Already on it. The next day, Daniel submitted an anonymous tip to the Texas Innocence Project, attaching redacted versions of the wound analysis, Elaine Morris's testimony, and the original me report. He didn't sign it. But he left a note, the dog remembers. Now the system needs to. Meanwhile, Luna had stopped eating again. Daniel sat beside her in the kennel that night, her head resting on his knee, her eyes distant. You knew, he whispered. You always knew. The next morning, he was woken by a phone call. It's Leah, the voice said. Someone just accessed the forensics database and flagged our model. It's gone. Erased from the system. Daniel felt the room tilt. Someone's watching, she said. And they're cleaning up. It was no longer just about evidence. It was survival. That afternoon, while Daniel was filling out a request for protective custody for Luna, a message appeared on his desk.
No enveloppe. No signature.
Just a printed slip of paper.
Stop digging. Or the dog goes first.
He looked around the hallway, no one. No cameras.
Just silence.
But he didn't stop. He picked up his phone and called Rebecca. It's time to go public. Rebecca Kim sat cross-legged on the floor of her small apartment in Austin, surrounded by files, photos, and coffee-stained notebooks. Her cat, Poe, watched from the windowsill, tail flicking with irritation every time she moved too fast. The apartment was cluttered and cramped, but for a reporter like Rebecca, it was sacred ground, the war room where stories were resurrected and spun into truth. She stared at the image on her laptop, a side-by-side comparison of the pathology wound and the digital model of Luna's bite. If this were fiction, an editor would have called it too symbolic, a dog uncovering a buried lie. But the truth didn't care about narrative structure. Her email inbox pinged. It was a message from her old producer at NPR. If you've really got something on this Merrick case, we'll give you airtime. But you better be ready to back it up. Broadcast in 48 hours. Confirm. Rebecca took a deep breath and typed. Confirmed. Title, The Dog Who Remembered. Meanwhile, Daniel Reyes was on thin ice at Ashfield Penitentiary. Word of his involvement in the reopened case had leaked. Officially, he was still a corrections officer. Unofficially, he was a liability. Warden Holloway called him into the office that afternoon.
You're dancing ou kniffesage, Reyes, Holloway said, voice low and grave.
I've had calls. From the sheriff's office.
From the district attorney.
They want you reassigned. Pulled out. And if I don't do it, they'll come after my license. Daniel didn't flinch. They're afraid, he said, because the evidence was buried under their feet.
I'm not kidding.
You don't have to, the warden replied. You're being transferred.
Starting tomorrow, you're off the Americas. Daniel stood in silence.
Then he nodded once and walked out. He wasn't surprised. He already had a plan. At 3 a.m. that night, he drove Luna to a safe house 2 hours outside Ashfield, a property owned by an old friend who owed him a favor. He left her there with food, surveillance cameras, and strict instructions. You bark, he told her gently. You warn them. Luna licked his hand once before lying down in the corner of the cabin. Back in Austin, Rebecca was preparing for her broadcast. She didn't take it to CNN or Fox. She uploaded it to her podcast, Unredacted. She knew her audience. She knew who would listen. And more importantly, she knew who would be scared that people were listening. She opened with a line that chilled the country. What if the only witness to a triple homicide was a dog, and what if that dog remembered everything? The episode ran for 41 minutes. She covered John Merrick's case from start to finish.
The missing forensic data.
The erased 3D model. The woman who had been dismissed for being too old. And Luna, the loyal Labrador who had watched it all, survived, and pointed the way back to the truth. The download counter exploded. By the end of the first day, the podcast had over 300,000 listens. By the next morning, it was over 1 million. Hashtags began trending. Hashtag the dog who remembered.
Hashtag justice for John.
Hashtag Luna speaks. Local news stations picked up the story. Then national outlets. By the time Daniel sat down in a booth at a roadside diner with a cup of burnt coffee in his hands, he saw his own face on the muted TV in the corner.
Rebecca Khaled.
They're coming for us, she said. The podcast hit #1 overnight. But so did the blowback. Cole Darnell's threatening a defamation suit. And I just got an anonymous voicemail saying, you're barking up the wrong tree.
Daniel exhaled.
Let them bark. We've got teeth now. That evening, Rebecca received a knock at her door. It was an older man with a limp and sunglasses that didn't quite hide the scar that ran from his cheekbone to his jaw. He introduced himself in a voice so quiet it was nearly a whisper.
Nemes Marcus Vega.
I think it's time someone told the truth. She let him in. Marcus sat stiffly on the couch, hat in hand, and stared down at the floor as he spoke. I was there that night, he said. Those 3 boys, they weren't kids. They were cartel messengers. They were sent to scare someone.
Maybe worse.
I was supposed to watch their backs. But they got sloppy. He looked up, eyes glassy. They started beating a man. Random guy with a dog. I told them to stop, but it was too late. The dog bit one of them. The guy tried to break it up. Then the sirens came. I ran. Why didn't you speak up? Rebecca asked. Because the sheriff told me not to.
Cole Darnell.
Said if I talked, I'd be the next body in the river. Said they'd pin it on the dog's owner. And they did. Rebecca reached slowly for her recorder.
Will you go on the record?
Marcus nodded.
Igot Notin left Toulouse.
The next episode of Unredacted dropped the following night.
Title, Witness in the Shadow.
Rebecca played Marcus's confession in full. His voice cracked, trembled, but didn't waver. For the first time, the narrative shifted.
John Merrick wasn't juste a Coleman on death row.
He was a scapegoat. People listened. And then they marched. Hundreds of protesters gathered outside Ashfield State Penitentiary. Luna's face, printed on signs. Merrick's name chanted through bullhorns. The governor was forced to make a statement.
We are launching an independent review of the Americas.
Inside his cell, John Merrick stared at the ceiling, hearing the distant hum of helicopters and voices. Daniel came to see him one last time. You did this, John said softly. No, Daniel replied. She did. John smiled for the first time in years. The morning after Marcus Vega's confession aired on Unredacted, Ashfield stirred like a town waking from a coma. The streets outside the courthouse swelled with protesters. Students, veterans, animal rights activists, exonerated inmates, They came from all over Texas, some carrying signs that read, "Dogs don't lie," others simply chanting, "Free John Merrick." Inside the Ashfield County Records office, an archivist named Trina Dorsey sat frozen in front of her screen. She had been listening to the podcast out of curiosity, but when Marcus mentioned a security camera near the old alley, her heart skipped. She knew that building. It was condemned now, but 5 years ago, Trina had been part of the county's digital archiving program. She had spent months digitizing footage from public and private security feeds for the Ashfield Police Department. Back then, she remembered something strange. A hard drive from a small grocery store next to the crime scene had arrived at her office, but the file was flagged, copied, and sent elsewhere before she had time to review it. A day later, she was told by someone in uniform to erase the source drive for space reasons. Trina didn't ask questions. She had bills to pay and a daughter in college. But now, her hands hovered over the same archive directory. She typed in the building's old address and searched. Nothing. Then she tried the serial number from the backup folder she had created years ago, secretly, without telling anyone. One file appeared. cam05_backlit_08_13_15 Movie. She opened it.
At first, grainy otage.
The timestamp read 10:52 p.m. 3 figures entered the alley. 2 were laughing. 1 was dragging something. Then another figure approached from the far corner, a man with a leash. A black dog. Seconds passed.
Suddenly, movement. The dog lunged.
The men shouted. There was a struggle. The man, unmistakably John Merrick, tried to hold the leash back. One of the others pulled an object from his coat. A fight.
The camera caught the glint of metal, then KO.
At 10:58 p.m., the 3 young men ran out of frame. The dog remained. The man collapsed beside the body of one of the victims. Trina sat back in her chair. It wasn't a confession. It was proof. She downloaded the file to a flash drive and slipped it into her purse. By 2 p.m., she was in Rebecca Kim's apartment in Austin. "You need to see this," Trina said, out of breath.
Rebecca watched the footage in silence.
Then again. Then a third time. She knew what she had.
Visual confirmation.
Timeline integrity. And above all, the truth, captured by a lens and buried by men who feared what it saw. She picked up her phone and called Daniel. "We have it," she said.
The missing tap.
Daniel didn't respond for a moment. Then, "Get it backed up."
3 copies. 1 to the Innocence Project, 1 to the press, and 1 to me.
Rebecca was already ahead of him. That evening, Unredacted released a special breaking episode, the tape they erased. It included full audio commentary, expert analysis, and legal interpretation. Within an hour, national networks picked up the story. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox News, all of them ran the headline. Video emerges in John Merrick case, prosecutors withheld crucial evidence. Meanwhile, Sheriff Cole Darnell held a press conference. His jaw was tight, his eyes red from lack of sleep. There was never any intent to conceal evidence, he said. The chain of custody was compromised. Mistakes were made. He refused to take questions. But the damage was done. The Texas Innocence Project filed an emergency petition to the State Court of Criminal Appeals. The video was deemed credible, and an official motion for reinvestigation was approved. Execution proceedings were halted. Daniel received the notice via certified mail while standing outside Luna's cabin. He opened the envelope with shaking hands. Effective immediately, the execution of John Merrick is suspended pending further judicial review. He looked down at Luna, who was sniffing the grass, tail swishing slowly. "You did it, girl," he whispered. But they weren't safe yet. That night, the security camera Daniel had installed outside the safe house picked up movement. 2 men in dark clothing approached the door. One held what appeared to be a tranquilizer gun. Luna began barking, loud and sharp.
The motion lights clicked on.
The men hesitated, then ran. Daniel called Rebecca at 3 a.m. "They're still trying to silence her." "We need to move her," Rebecca said.
Sommière publique. Sommière they can't touch. What are you thinking? Arali.
3 days later, they staged a public demonstration in front of the state capitol in Austin. Luna stood on a platform with Daniel, Rebecca, and a representative from the Innocence Project. Behind them played clips from the video, a montage of evidence, and excerpts from Marcus Vega's confession. The crowd was massive. Thousands. TV crews captured every moment. Drone footage swept across the sea of signs: "Justice for Merrick, Dogs No, We Believe Luna." John Merrick watched the coverage from a secure room inside Ashfield Penitentiary. A guard turned up the volume. When the camera zoomed in on Luna, John pressed his hand against the screen. Tears filled his eyes. In a courtroom 2 weeks later, John Merrick was formally granted a full retrial. Marcus Vega took the stand.
So dit d'Hélène Maurice.
And then Trina Dorsey, with the original copy of the erased footage. One by one, the pillars of the prosecution crumbled. The final witness was Dr. Leah Mercer, who explained how Luna's bite had matched the wound on victim number 2, a detail dismissed in the original investigation. Luna didn't attack John Merrick, she concluded. She defended him. That night, the district attorney made an announcement. In light of overwhelming new evidence and procedural misconduct, the state of Texas withdraws its case against John Merrick. We will not oppose his release. Daniel was there when they opened the gate. John Merrick stepped out of Ashfield for the first time in nearly a decade. Older.
Tiner.
But free. Luna rushed forward, tail wagging. She leapt into his arms. The crowd cheered. But John only had eyes for her. "Let's go home," he whispered. John Merrick's release was not met with universal applause. For every headline celebrating justice, there were murmurs in backrooms, whispers in the corridors of power, and tight-lipped conversations behind closed doors. Men like Sheriff Cole Darnell didn't vanish overnight. Neither did the structures that had kept him in power for so long. In the weeks following John's release, the state launched a formal inquiry into the original investigation. An oversight committee was formed, chaired by Senator Louise Gentry, a moderate Democrat with a long history of judicial reform advocacy. She was shrewd, camera-savvy, and politically ambitious. Daniel Reyes was summoned to testify first. "You acted outside your chain of command," the senator said, reading from the printed dossier. "Why?" "Because following protocol meant letting an innocent man die," Daniel answered. "And the role of the dog?" she asked, less skeptically than Daniel expected. "She remembered what others forgot," he said. "She led us to what people tried to bury." The room fell silent. Later, Rebecca Kim testified. Then Marcus Vega, under full immunity. And finally Trina Dorsey, the archivist who defied a direct order to delete the tape. Each voice added weight to the emerging narrative. The Merrick case had been mishandled, not by accident, but by design. It was more than incompetence. It was orchestration. Soon after, subpoenas were issued. Sheriff Cole Darnell was called to appear before the committee. When he arrived, flanked by his legal team, his swagger was gone. He looked smaller under the harsh lights of public scrutiny. His prepared statement blamed departmental miscommunication and technical failures. But the committee had the paper trail, emails, deleted files, internal memos. He had signed off on all of it. When asked directly, "Did you knowingly suppress evidence in a capital case?" he pled the fifth. That moment was broadcast live across the country. Public opinion shifted further. Petitions for Darnell's resignation amassed hundreds of thousands of signatures. The governor, facing re-election, distanced himself from the sheriff within 24 hours. But the question lingered: who else had known? Rebecca began digging into campaign contributions tied to Ashfield's judicial system. What she found was damning. Over the past decade, a private prison corporation, Southbridge Correctional Systems, had donated more than $5 million to local law enforcement and DA campaigns in Texas. Sheriff Darnell had received over $200,000. And in a confidential email obtained by a whistleblower, a Southbridge executive referred to the Merrick case as an asset preservation priority. They had every reason to ensure someone, anyone, stayed in that cell. When Rebecca published the exposé, the backlash was immediate. Southbridge stock plummeted. State lawmakers launched hearings into the influence of private prisons. Protests reignited, this time not just for John Merrick, but for every unknown name caught in the machine. Meanwhile, John tried to live. He moved into a small cottage in rural Texas, a place with enough land for Luna to roam. The mornings were quiet. He gardened. He walked. He read. But sleep came slowly. Too many nights had been spent under fluorescent lights, too many memories etched into his skin.
Daniel visited every weekend.
On one of those visits, John asked, "Do you think people believe me now?" Daniel didn't answer right away. "I think they believe the dog."
John logued, à tired, whizzing sound. Faire neuf.
But the peace didn't last. Late one night, Luna began barking at the tree line behind the cottage. John stepped outside, flashlight in hand. He found tire tracks in the dirt. Fresh. Still damp from rain. He called Daniel. "They were here," he said. "Didn't come close, but they were watching." Rebecca reviewed the footage from the property's outdoor cameras. 2 figures.
Unidentifié.
She sent it to the state authorities, but nothing came of it. The message was clear: someone was still out there. And they were waiting. That week, Senator Gentry received an anonymous package. Inside was a thumb drive. It contained a single video, a grainy recording of a warehouse meeting 5 years prior. The participants, mostly out of frame, discussed suppressing the Merrick footage. One voice was identifiable. It was the former assistant district attorney for Ashfield County. His name was on the original death penalty recommendation. Within 48 hours, he resigned. That same day, Luna was poisoned. Daniel had arrived early that morning and found her collapsed near the porch. They rushed her to an emergency vet. The diagnosis: ingestion of a synthetic neurotoxin. It was deliberate. She survived barely, after 2 days of round-the-clock treatment. When John came to see her at the clinic, she lifted her head weakly. He sank to the floor beside her. "They still want you gone," he whispered. "But you're still here." Rebecca published another story, "The Dog They Couldn't Silence." It exploded online. Support poured in from across the globe. Donations covered Luna's treatment. Activists demanded stronger protections for animals involved in criminal investigations. Congress introduced a bill in Luna's name. The Luna Act, Legal Use of Non-Human Animals, proposed formal recognition of animals as witnesses in legal investigations, particularly in abuse and violent crime cases where human testimony is unavailable or unreliable. It was controversial. It ignited debate. But it forced the nation to reckon with a question: can loyalty and memory survive where truth has been silenced? In Ashfield, the once forgotten man and his dog became a symbol. But symbols are never safe. And neither was the truth, not yet. The poisoning of Luna marked a new chapter, not just in the investigation, but in the stakes. It was no longer about John Merrick. It was no longer just about justice. It was about exposure. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to silence a story, they were trying to dismantle any chance of accountability. The message was brutal and clear: stop now, or suffer the consequences. Senator Louise Gentry didn't back down. In fact, she doubled her efforts. Within a week, she called for a formal congressional hearing on the influence of private correctional institutions in state-level judicial misconduct. The hearing was scheduled for Washington, D.C., and she requested that both John Merrick and Daniel Reyes testify. Daniel wasn't sure John would go. He had withdrawn since Luna's poisoning, speaking less, sleeping less. Luna was still recovering, slow to eat, slower to walk, but she stayed by John's side. Her fur had grown thinner from stress, her eyes a little dimmer. When Daniel brought up the hearing, John looked away. "They already took everything. What more do they want?" "Your voice," Daniel said. "The part they couldn't silence." John hesitated, then nodded. Meanwhile, Rebecca Kim traced the flow of campaign money from Southbridge Correctional Systems into multiple state judicial campaigns across Texas, Louisiana, and Arizona. At least 4 judges currently serving had received significant undisclosed contributions. One of them had presided over a high-profile wrongful conviction case eerily similar to Merrick's. She wrote the article over 3 nights. It dropped under the headline, "Profits and Prisoners: How Private Prisons Shaped American Justice." It sent shockwaves through every legal circle in the country. But it also made her a target. One morning, she found her apartment door ajar. Nothing stolen. Just her notes scattered across the floor, a coffee mug shattered in the sink, and a photo of Luna, ripped in half, left on her pillow.
Nos fins gerprunts. Nos caméras faux otages.
No witnesses. But the message was there. The next day, she moved into a hotel under a pseudonym.
She stopped walking anywhere alone.
She didn't answer unknown calls. She kept her laptop encrypted and her backups cloud-based in 3 countries. When she met with Daniel the following weekend, her eyes were bloodshot from sleeplessness. "They're losing control," she said. "That's why they're getting sloppy." Daniel nodded. "That makes them dangerous." 2 weeks later, the congressional hearing began. John wore a dark gray suit that fit loosely around his frame. Luna, now stable, walked beside him with a slow, regal gait. The hearing room was packed: journalists, lawmakers, legal scholars, and victims of wrongful convictions across the country. Senator Gentry's opening statement was brief and sharp. "This is not just about one man. It's about a system that forgot its purpose. A system that imprisoned truth for profit. And today, we begin the process of reclaiming justice." John was the second witness called. He cleared his throat, leaned forward, and spoke in a voice stronger than he'd used in years. "I was told to sign a confession or lose the only thing I had left. They told me my dog was dead. That there was no point in fighting. I believed them. For a while. But Luna didn't forget. She remembered what I couldn't say." He paused. "There are others like me.
Men without voices. Without dogs. Without second chance.
I got lucky. That's not justice. That's a coin toss." The room was silent when he finished. Daniel spoke next, testifying to the cover-up, the erased evidence, and the intimidation tactics he faced from within the system itself. Rebecca was called last. She laid out the entire web of financial influence with brutal clarity: names, dates, transfers, donations. She read a portion of an internal memo from Southbridge aloud. Efficiency of sentencing correlated to facility revenue. Risk management may include expedited plea agreements and selective witness credibility challenges. When she finished, the room broke into whispers and gasps. Senator Gentry brought her gavel down hard. "Order." By the end of the week, 4 resignations were submitted from top-level officials across Texas. A Department of Justice task force was assigned to investigate Southbridge. But with every step forward, resistance hardened. Daniel received an unmarked envelope at his home. Inside, a photo of him with Luna, printed from a telephoto lens. Scribbled in red ink across the bottom were 4 words.
"Stay watching.
Choose wisely." He reported it immediately, but the agents assigned to him said the trail went cold. No prints. No mail record. The warning had come from inside the network. Luna was moved again. This time to an undisclosed animal sanctuary in the Rocky Mountains, under 24-hour surveillance. John visited when he could, but he understood now, she had become more than a pet. She was a symbol. A living piece of evidence they couldn't destroy. 1 week later, Marcus Vega was found unconscious in his motel room. No drugs.
No wounds.
Just gone, catatonic. The doctors called it a stress-induced neurological shutdown. "He knew something else," Rebecca whispered to Daniel. "Something he never said." Daniel agreed. But time was running out. They began re-examining all of Marcus's prior statements, transcripts, and interviews. In one audio clip, buried in a longer recording, Marcus had said something strange. "They made him disappear too."
The janitor.
You know, the one who kept the tapes. The janitor. That led them back to the original grocery store near the crime scene. The building had been demolished, but Daniel tracked down the property manager at the time, an older man named Frank Colton, who now lived in rural New Mexico. Frank agreed to meet. Over black coffee and long pauses, he admitted to hiring a man named Abel Cord to clean and manage the security systems in 2015. "I liked him," Frank said. "Quiet, but sharp. Said he had a kid with disabilities.
Always on time."
"Where is he now?" Daniel asked. Frank's eyes dimmed. Disappeared 3 days after the Merrick arrest.
Never came back.
Left his last paycheck unclaimed. Rebecca wrote the name down.
Another thread. Another body buried under the weight of a system built to protect itself.
They were no longer chasing justice. They were digging up the bones of a machine that ran on silence. And it wasn't done fighting. The storm was no longer building, it had arrived. By early autumn, the scandal surrounding Southbridge correctional systems had spread beyond the southern states. Investigations were launched in California, Illinois, and Florida. More judges were named. More prosecutors resigned. Whistleblowers emerged, one after another, describing a systemic culture of coercion, manufactured convictions, and political complicity. But the face of the reckoning wasn't a senator, or a journalist, or even a wrongfully convicted man. It was a dog. Luna's image, her eyes steady, her coat black and shining despite illness, had become the symbol of something raw and irrefutable. She was printed on T-shirts, painted in murals, marched on banners in cities across the country. Not because she was extraordinary, but because her loyalty had exposed what systems of power had tried to hide. John Merrick remained reluctant to speak publicly. After years in prison, his natural instinct was to withdraw, to protect what peace he had salvaged. But the world wouldn't let him disappear. He had become something larger than his own story. It was Rebecca who finally convinced him. "We need your voice," she told him one evening, sitting with him on the back porch of his cottage. "They've seen the symbols. Now they need to hear the man." John was silent for a long time, stroking Luna's head. "She's the reason I'm alive," he said. "But people don't want the real story. They want something clean. Neat. This isn't that. That's exactly why it has to be you." He agreed to speak at a town hall event in Austin, live-streamed nationally. It would be his first public address since his release. The venue was packed before doors opened, and a line stretched around the block. Reporters from national outlets jostled for space in the media pit. John stepped onto the stage with Luna at his side. He looked older than ever, but his presence was undeniable. He didn't speak from a script. He spoke from scars. "I'm not a hero," he began. "I didn't fight the system. I survived it. Because a dog remembered the truth better than the people paid to protect it." The room was silent. "I don't know what justice means anymore."
You only know what silence does. It kills the truth.
"It punishes the wrong people. And it lets those in power sleep at night while the rest of us suffer." He turned slightly, hand resting on Luna's back. "If not for her, I'd be a name on a tombstone. Or worse, a name no one remembered at all." The applause didn't erupt all at once. It built slowly, quietly, then rose into a wave that shook the rafters. For the first time in his life, John Merrick wasn't invisible. In Washington, Senator Gentry introduced the final draft of the Luna Act to Congress. It included sweeping reforms, mandatory independent reviews in all capital cases, restricted private funding for judicial campaigns, and protections for animal witnesses involved in investigations. The debates were fierce. Opponents claimed the bill was emotional and legally unprecedented. Supporters countered that so was the depth of corruption exposed by one dog's memory. Meanwhile, Daniel Reyes had been offered promotion after promotion, positions in federal oversight, law enforcement reform task forces, advisory roles. He declined them all. "I didn't do this for a career," he told Rebecca. "I did it because I couldn't sleep at night knowing an innocent man was going to die." Still, his name carried weight now. And so did hers. Rebecca Kim was nominated for a National Press Award. Her podcast Unredacted had become one of the most influential investigative platforms in the country. But she kept her distance from celebration. Too many names still hadn't surfaced. Too many stories hadn't been told. One day, weeks after the town hall, John received a letter in the mail. It was unsigned. Inside was a photograph, grainy, likely taken from a distance. It showed Abel Cord, the missing janitor mentioned by Marcus Vega. He was alive, somewhere in southern Arizona, living under an assumed name.
No return address.
No explanation. John handed the photo to Daniel. If he's alive, he saw something. Maybe more than Marcus. Daniel nodded. "I'll find him." The trail was faint. No official record, no social security filings, just fragments, employment at a truck stop, a medical bill paid in cash, a child enrolled in a school under a different surname. But Daniel was patient. When he finally tracked Abel Cord to a trailer park near Yuma, Arizona, he didn't approach immediately. He watched for days, confirming the identity. Abel had aged poorly, gray hair, a noticeable limp, but his mannerisms matched the file. And he had a daughter, just like Frank Colton had said. Daniel made contact carefully, introducing himself without badge or title. When Abel realized who he was, he froze. "I don't want to die," he whispered. "You won't," Daniel said. "But you have to talk. There are people who need to know." That night, in a dimly lit trailer, Abel Cord told his story. He had been the first to review the original surveillance footage. He had tried to alert a supervisor. Days later, 2 men in suits arrived, said they were from Internal Affairs, and confiscated everything. They told him to keep his mouth shut. They knew what they were doing, he said. They said it wasn't about guilt or innocence. It was about stability. That was the word they used. Stability.
Daniel recorded the interview.
When the footage was published, it was the final nail in the coffin. The DOJ opened criminal proceedings against Southbridge executives. Several state officials faced indictments. Sheriff Cole Darnell was arrested for obstruction of justice and evidence tampering. And in the middle of it all, Luna recovered fully. She no longer flinched at sudden noises.
She ran freely again.
And on the day the Luna Act passed with bipartisan support, she sat quietly at John Merrick's feet, tail wagging slowly, watching the world shift, because she had refused to forget. The courthouse in Austin was larger than the one in Ashfield, but somehow felt smaller. Maybe it was the crowd, press, supporters, victims of wrongful convictions, and onlookers who had followed the story for years. Maybe it was the tension, the sense that the verdict would be more than a ruling for one man, it would be a test of whether the justice system could confront its own failure. John Merrick stood in the hallway outside the courtroom, flanked by his attorney, Daniel Reyes, and Luna, who had been granted special permission by the court to accompany him inside. She wore a harness labeled Witness Support Animal, but everyone knew she was more than that. She was the reason they were here. The retrial of State of Texas versus John Merrick began not with fanfare, but with formality. The judge, a federal appointee known for her stern demeanor, read the charges aloud. 3 counts of murder. 1 count of obstruction. 1 count of resisting arrest. "Mr. Merrick," she said, "how do you plead?" John looked at her and spoke evenly.
"Not guilty."
This time, the world was watching. The prosecution, under new leadership, presented a summary of their case. It was surprisingly restrained, no character attacks, no dramatization. Their opening argument acknowledged the previous trial's failures. "We are not here to defend the past," the lead prosecutor said. "We are here to determine the truth now, in light of what has been uncovered." That statement set the tone. Over the next several days, the court reviewed every piece of new evidence, the surveillance footage long buried, the audio confession of Marcus Vega, the forensic report confirming Luna's bite pattern matched the wound misidentified in the original autopsy. Then came the witnesses. Elaine Morris took the stand first, her voice shaking but resolute. "I saw him try to stop it," she said. "He yelled.
The dog barked.
He didn't run like the others. He stayed." Trina Dorsey followed, explaining how the footage was deleted and why she kept a secret backup. Rebecca Kim testified about threats, break-ins, and the campaign to silence not just her, but the truth itself. And finally, Abel Cord, reluctant, weathered but unflinching, confirmed the order to suppress the evidence came from above. He didn't name names, but the implication was unmistakable. The defense rested without calling John to the stand. There was no need. He had already told his story to the world. When the jury returned, they did not look uncertain. The clerk read the verdict. "On the count of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant not guilty. On the remaining charges, we find the defendant not guilty."
A quiet gasp rippled through the courtroom.
John Merrick exhaled, his shoulders dropping slightly as if unburdened by invisible weight. Luna stood up beside him, tail swaying softly. The judge banged her gavel. "Mr. Merrick, you are hereby exonerated of all charges.
You are a free man."
But justice doesn't heal overnight. Outside the courtroom, supporters embraced. Journalists filed urgent headlines. Rebecca recorded a short video for Unredacted, saying simply, "He was innocent. We failed him. And we only learned because a dog wouldn't let us forget." That night, John didn't celebrate. He walked with Luna through a quiet park near the courthouse, breathing in air that tasted different than the one behind bars. I still don't know what to do with this, he admitted to Daniel, who had joined him on the walk.
Freedom feel too big.
Like it doesn't fit. You earned it, Daniel replied. That doesn't mean it'll feel comfortable right away. John nodded. Across the country, reform discussions ignited. State legislatures introduced bills echoing the Luna Act. Some passed quickly. Others stalled. But the movement had begun. Then, 2 days after the verdict, a package arrived at Daniel's apartment.
No return address.
Inside was a burned phone, partially melted from heat damage. Alongside it, a typed note. The case isn't closed. You just found the scapegoat.
Rebecca ran the serial number through an old database.
It had belonged to a man named Arturo Calderon, a mid-level logistics coordinator for Southbridge, missing for over a year, presumed dead in an unsolved fire at a company-owned storage facility. The phone still had a functioning memory card. Daniel and Rebecca worked through the night to recover the contents. What they found was shocking. The files included internal memos, private recordings, and emails between Southbridge executives and certain law enforcement officials, including mentions of asset exchanges, cooperative suppression, and one particularly disturbing audio clip of a phone call. We don't care who did it. We care that it stays quiet. Pin it on whoever is closest.
TE plus ends. The voice on the call?
Unmistakably Cole Darnell. The phone data tied him not only to the Merrick case, but to at least 3 other wrongful convictions, all involving minority defendants, weak evidence, and connection to Southbridge-run facilities. This wasn't just about John. It was part of a larger operation, a system designed to feed bodies into private prisons under the guise of law and order. Daniel brought the evidence to federal prosecutors. An indictment followed. Not just for Cole Darnell, but for 5 executives at Southbridge, 2 judges, and 1 state senator. Charges ranged from conspiracy to defraud the government to civil rights violations. But even as arrests were made, retaliation simmered beneath the surface. Rebecca's car was found torched outside her hotel. Daniel's sister received anonymous phone calls warning her to ask him to back off. Luna's sanctuary received a threat. One of the caretakers was followed home. And John? John received another letter, this one handwritten. You were never supposed to walk free. Keep talking, and we finish what we started. He showed it to Daniel without fear. I'm not running, he said. We'll protect you, Daniel answered. But both of them knew the truth. They were no longer fighting just for a man, a dog, or a case. They were fighting against an entire belief system, one that had grown comfortable in the dark. And now that light had found it, it was lashing out. Winter came early that year. Snow dusted the fields around John Merrick's cottage, covering the brittle grass in a layer of quiet, unearned peace. Inside, the fire crackled low in the hearth, and Luna lay beside it, her breathing slow and even, a thin blanket draped over her back. John sat by the window, a mug of black coffee untouched in his hands. He had grown thinner again, partly from age, partly from the constant weight of a battle he had never wanted but could no longer walk away from. Daniel arrived just after sunrise. He entered without knocking, as he always did now. They charged another judge last night, Daniel said, shrugging off his coat. And the DOJ announced a second wave of investigations. This time in Florida and Nevada.
John gave a slow nod.
Good. They're finally looking. Daniel sat across from him. You okay? John didn't answer right away. He looked down at Luna, then out the window. I've been thinking about something, he said. When I was first arrested, they wouldn't let me call anyone. Not a lawyer.
Not my brother.
Not even animal control. I kept asking about her. And they kept ignoring me. One guard finally said, it's just a dog. He paused. But she wasn't. She remembered what I couldn't prove. She stood between me and the world. Daniel nodded. She did more than that. She brought the whole thing down. Rebecca Kim arrived later that day. She was thinner too, worn by the months of pressure, exposure, and the ever-present sense of danger. But her eyes were sharp, and her voice was steady. We've been offered a documentary deal, she said. Feature length.
National distribution.
I said no. John raised an eyebrow. Why? Because I don't want a documentary, Rebecca said.
You want a movement.
She handed John a folder. Inside was a proposal, the Luna Initiative, a non-profit that would provide legal and forensic support to prisoners with animal witnesses or evidence dismissed by traditional systems. The first of its kind. I want you to be on the board, she said. I'm not a lawyer, John replied. You're something better, she said. Proof. He said yes. Word of the Luna Initiative spread quickly. Within a month, they had funding from national donors, endorsements from high-profile legal advocates, and hundreds of case files submitted for review. Some were straightforward. Some were messy. All were human. But in the background, the threats continued. One morning, the sanctuary where Luna had once been kept was vandalized.
Graffiti sprayed across the gates. Stop digging.
Later that week, Daniel's car was sideswiped in what was clearly an attempted hit. No arrests. No answers.
Juste un familiar silence.
It would have been easy to quit. But they didn't. Instead, they went bigger. Daniel testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee about misconduct in correctional institutions. Rebecca delivered a TED Talk titled, What the Dog Remembered. John appeared, quietly and powerfully, on a 60-minute special that drew 20 million viewers. And Luna? She kept showing up. To rallies. To hearings. To courtrooms where her presence comforted others who had been silenced. She was old now. Her steps slower. Her muzzle fully gray. But her memory was as sharp as ever. And then one evening in March, Luna didn't get up. John noticed first. She didn't meet him at the door when he returned from a meeting. She didn't move when he called her name. He sat down beside her, placed a hand gently on her side. Still warm.
Still breathing.
But her eyes no longer opened. He stayed with her all night. By morning, she was gone. They held a public memorial in Austin. Thousands came. Some brought their own dogs. Some brought candles. Some brought nothing but grief and gratitude. Rebecca delivered the eulogy. She didn't have a voice, she said, but she made the truth heard. She didn't seek justice. She became it. And she didn't fight alone. But without her, none of us would have known what we were fighting for. They buried Luna beneath a tree on John's property.
No marble.
No statue. Just a simple wooden marker with her name and the words. She remembered. Weeks passed. The legal reforms continued. The Luna Act was adopted in 5 more states. Southbridge declared bankruptcy and dissolved. Cole Darnell received a 20-year sentence for conspiracy and obstruction.
The web unraveled.
And still, the world asked questions. How had this happened? Why had it taken a dog to uncover it? There were no easy answers. But there was one undeniable truth: memory is a kind of testimony. And sometimes it lives in fur and instinct, in eyes that refuse to look away, in loyalty that doesn't fade. John spent his final years working quietly with the initiative, reviewing letters, visiting prisoners, advocating for reform. When he passed away in his sleep at 82, Daniel was the one who found him. On John's desk was a worn photograph, Luna as a puppy, sitting in his lap, one paw on his chest. He was buried beside her, under the same tree. Years later, the Luna Initiative became a national network. A scholarship was established in her name for veterinary students studying animal behavior and forensic support. And every year, on the anniversary of her memorial, people gathered beneath the tree. They didn't come for spectacle. They came because they remembered. And they came to remind the world that truth doesn't always shout.
Sommetim, id bark.